Yes, Geraldine is becoming one of my very, very favorite speakers, and she is really at the cutting edge of ET interactions. And it happened with a sudden awakening of her consciousness, even though she was practicing meditation for a long time. I don't know if she'll tell her story, but she found herself on a ship and realizing that she had so many ET connections, these hybrid children. And what I like about Geraldine is that she's developed an awareness of the science, of the bloodlines, of the technologies, of the interface between human and alien DNA. And I think she'll be talking about some of that today. Geraldine, we want to see your face. Turn your camera on. And it's going to be a doubleheader for me and Geraldine today. I'm going to see her live later today in San Francisco. So welcome, Geraldine Orozco.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
So excited to be here. Thank you for that warm welcome. Hi, Joan. I just saw you beautiful faces this week. And Neil, so good to connect with you again. I'm excited to be here.
Great. What's your topic? What's your main theme you're going to be focusing on?
Well, we're going to go into something a little bit different this time. We're going to be talking about ET races, both the genetic aspect and evolution, and how we interact with them on different vibrational frequencies. Are we potentially the future ETs that we are meeting in these interdimensional activities, and how are these races manifesting? We'll talk a little bit about shape, form, the geometry of the universe, and the geometry of the physical body.
Whoa.
So we'll get into some of that.
That is exciting. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll be back soon. Thanks. Okay. Have a great one.
Thank you so much. All right. So everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here. I am going to share my presentation with you and we will jump right in. We do have a lot to cover. And I'm really happy to also answer questions for anybody that would like to ask questions. I definitely welcome that. So just give me 1 minute to set myself up here. Let's see if we can get this going properly. Mode. And I am going to, how do I switch my... Let's see.
Oh, you had it for a second there. It just showed up there. Now you have it.
Is that it? Okay. Trying to see my lovely little notes, though. Let me see.
Oh.
Which I don't know how that will work.
Oh, you're trying to see your notes? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'd really like to see my notes.
There's always been an issue with that with the speakers I've tried in the past.
Okay. We'll just go with the flow.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So today we are going to be talking about ET races, genetics, and dimensions, expressions, and the human experience. There are several ways that I really love to talk about this topic, but this is the first time that I'm actually presenting this concept in its entirety because it's a very complex topic and because there's many levels to it. But let's just go over really briefly the kind of agenda just to focus on what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about, oh darn, now I lost you again. I'm so sorry, guys. Let me figure out how to. Maybe in meeting pane. There we go. We're going to be talking about the creation of the universe. We're going to be talking about genetics, self-similar origins, archetypal races and frequency, ancestral lineages of contact, evolution of races, mental states and contact, future of humans, and the spectrums of the multiverse through evolution. So there's just a quick brief intro as to who I am. My name is Geraldine Orozco, and I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I became a clinical hypnotherapist after a powerful, life-changing experience in 2017, where I began to channel in my hypnotherapy information of life on this planet as a result of my contact experiences that happened in 2013. And in 2013, I had a very conscious physical contact where I was removed out of my bedroom and taken on board a craft and shown a plethora of information regarding my previous contact, and my participation in the hybridization program. So this kind of sparked my interest in that so much that I really couldn't live this kind of double life. And even though after a couple years after that, I began to integrate primarily this incredible intuitive ability that was activated through that contact, I decided to research and study a little bit, and I wasn't finding the answers. I wasn't finding the answers about the hybridization program, the role that we play and where free will plays a role in that. So essentially in 2017, I got a hypnotherapy, and through that information began to understand and travel into these dimensional planes in which I saw not just the construct of man, human, the soul, the role that it plays in this universe, and then going beyond that into higher dimensions to explore how source basically comes into the physical realm and how we participate in the co-creation and evolution of this whole organism. So one of the things that I first started to understand was that really, in fact, we have been visited for centuries, and looking back at the origins of our roots in ET contact, really we have an entire origin of life force, an entire origin of human race. And if we look back at ancient texts, for example, the tablets of Gilgamesh, the Book of Enoch, the Emerald tablets, the Sumerian and the cuneiform tablets, we have depictions of these interdimensional extraterrestrial races that have and blend with mankind in order to create life. And we see this in all different countries around the world, these similar images and depictions of these incredible beings that are a combination of man, reptile, bird, different races that create these beautiful different beings. And there's a lot of symbolism within each one of these incredible petroglyphs that were left behind, that really, when you understand your multidimensionality, you understand the connection between every shape, every form that is carved into these own paintings. And they really help us understand our history and the role that we actually play in the greater whole. I was also shown that 3 main bloodlines created our human race. And at the beginning of this information, I was not sure what that was about, but essentially, these are the primal functions that come into form that create the human body. Everything from our reptilian brain, the analytical survival, flight or fight aspect of ourselves, to the more evolved, intuitive aspect of our expression is expressed through these 3 main bloodlines. The first being a red bloodline, and this was depicted as a more very earthy, very basic and primal consciousness. The green bloodline was represented as a snake, reptilian, draconian type of bloodline, and the blue bloodline represented a more evolved human, perhaps even Pleiadian bloodline. And in this presentation, I'm going to refrain from using the common names and terms for these species, because I would like to kind of broaden your perspective into looking at our contact as more than just species and specific facial features and physical depictions, rather looking more as a vibrational frequency. And so these 3 main vibrational frequencies are essentially what we are made out of. We are descendants of these bloodlines. These bloodlines were the original that were crossed, and I go very in-depth into these topics when we talk about the original races, everything from the bloodline that goes from Enki and Lil and all of its descendants coming into our current modern day society through history, where some royal bloodlines were heavily preserved through history. And the the heavy preservation of these bloodlines basically are depicting the kind of information that is being held within this organism. The bloodlines represent primal forms that create the complexity of man and how light bends and fragments into the form of the hologram. So we're going to also learn about how DNA is really this beautifully complex geometric system that allows light to bend and to store massive amounts of data. So we are the descendants of that information. And every single one of these bloodlines it has a certain geometry to it. So when you combine them, we end up with the form which we are. So let's go back into the beginning now. Let's talk about the very beginning of the universe, because it's really important to understand this as a backup, because we want to understand how we all came to be. We look at the Big Bang in our modern science. We have the theory of the Big Bang, in which we come from this origin point and where after thousands and thousands of years began to manifest form into galaxies, stars, the expansion of the universe as it accelerated, as it created the planets and then the beings on Earth. But each one of these different aspects and phases of evolution can be really easily explained in a way through a different eye. So I want to take for a moment you to take a look at this universe, and almost as if it were this evolutionary process like a DNA strand. In fact, we live in a DNA strand, and we are literally incredibly the most beautiful design of the universe, and this is scientifically proven, that the design of the universe is in this spiral motion. And movement was already pre-designed before light even existed. So the particular pattern of EMF frequencies fitted modern music theory that found an ancient basis in the 12-tone octave-like semi-harmonic structure based in an adapted Pythagorean tuning. The grounding mathematics with real and imagery numbers predicted a rotary feature. We were saying a scale invariant toroidal operator displaying a communicative Warhol structure emerges as a connective print universe. So essentially, this self-referential aspect of a torus trajectory and not pointed at a relation with its reflective states of human self-consciousness. So this is absolutely so beautiful, and it really helps us understand how really the form, the way that intelligence organizes itself in this multiverse is in this form of a spiral. There's a certain order to how information is organized. Now, this is important because toroidal geometry is found in everything. We find it in nature, we find it in our physical, we find it in space, we find it from the micro to the macro, we find it everywhere. And so the geometric process of a spiral information, the enfolding and unfolding, can be literally observed and discerned conceptually in all natural systems. In metabolic processes, the function of certain blood cells, as well as in the resource exchange of plants and animals within their environment. It is also evident outwardly that the macrocosmic realms of planets, stars, and galaxies, and inwardly in the microcosmic, elemental, and atomic realms. So this is basically figure 8 and part 2, thus the synergistic of the torus geometry and recurrent toroidal energy. These flow patterns seem to be fundamental to all cosmic creation. And this was studied by Lefferts. I do have this entire research document that you can find on my website. Aside from how we are moving in this spiral motion, there's another thing that happens in which, as we are moving in this spiral motion, there is this beautiful self-organized symmetry that is being created. And that symmetry creates points that essentially creates a lattice structure in our universe. But this lattice structure is also found in our physical body. And it's what makes the hologram possible, this concept of a holographic universe, the concept of the holographic holographic system of the body. And within the structure and the mathematic separations of these points, of these degrees in the movement of this spiral motion, there's a beautiful math to that that allows us to calculate a golden ratio within DNA, within the physical body, within the fractals that our entire existence is made out of. And this is very important because this golden ratio plays a very important role in the understanding and the connection in how these systems were all blending together. We also find this in DNA, of course, and when you look at these DNA strands from above, when you slice them, you begin to notice these incredible geometric patterns. And these geometric patterns help us understand that there is an organization to our own DNA. In fact, every single human has a unique vibrational frequency and expression, a signature that makes up their form and their expression, not just in how this DNA is structured, but the information that is being expressed from that. Our entire physical body is essentially a DNA strand, in that the spiraling, twisting, and moving of life force that moves through the body is moving in the exact same motion. It is alternating as the energy moves through the physical body, and this movement goes all the way up into our source as we connect up into the highest realm. This is important because, again, we begin to notice how form takes shape into the physical body. Every single one of these incredible geometric shapes that are expressed by this movement is creating these platonic solids. The platonic solids are expressions and how light is bent. When light is bent, at these different dimensional planes, they create these shapes, and the shapes create this space. When you combine them all together, they create these complex geometric shapes, and we essentially are an expression of that. But the next step to this understanding is that really everything includes these platonic shapes. This is the periodic table that is depicting the platonic shape of the structure of each one of these elements. So our entire universe, our entire world is made up of these combinations of platonic shapes. Our physical body is made up, matter is made up of that. When you take that to the next level, looking at DNA, and let's take it to the macro, now we begin to see these same shapes in our multiverse. We are, just as all of these shapes are spiraling, our entire universe is spiraling. And at this particular moment, we are moving through the 13th spiral, the 13th spiral of this great evolutionary cycle. And basically, because of the number 13, and it's depicting the vibrational dimensions that are accessible to all organisms within this range, and as well as the platonic solids that are being accessible in order to create form, life. But every single one of these loops, every single one of these spirals are essentially creating this holographic system of data and memory and information. So it functions like a DNA. Just the way our physical body has this vibrational memory that is storing everyday experiences, not just in waking time, but in dream time, astral plane, when we go up to higher dimensions, when we have ET contact, when we are experiencing all those things, everything is stored within this holographic system. And the world, the planet Earth, also functions in that same way because it is a toroidal field as well. The way that life force is moving through the planet, it also has its own DNA structure. And the DNA structure is what we call the Akashic records, compiling all the information since the origin of time. We are also at this particular moment in time moving through the fastest point in that trajectory line, as a matter of fact. So essentially we are moving through this faster. And what does that mean? It means that you have to adjust and align to this higher vibrational frequency. When you are not in this high vibrational frequency, you basically dissolve. Matter dissolves because you're not a match. You're not in resonance to this field. And this is very important for us to understand the mechanics of resonance, because when we talk about contact, for example, It's all about resonance. It's all about vibrational frequency. We are merging and interacting with these different dimensional planes, which are available to us at all times based on our vibrational frequency. So what we experience individually, we experience collectively, again, as above, so below, we're experiencing vibrationally as we move through these experiences. So let's talk a little bit about what do these ancient stories say about the manifestation of life force as it comes from the origin. We talk about source as source being the origin of all things. And now the way I look at this and the way I look at the Big Bang Theory, in fact, is more as if that's what we're talking about. What they thought was a giant of light and plasma and all these Big Bang that was created in that moment is actually source. It's actually the source of all things. It's infinite potential. And from that infinite potential, an aspect desires to experience separation or experience anything, really, in fact, not just separation. And it experiences through all potential experiences. And so as a result of that desire to experience comes fragmentation, because it's infinite potential. As it comes down in the dimensional layers, this infinite data has to fragment in some way. And this is when we fragment, and this is where you begin to see how the beauty of this multiverse self-organizes intelligently into specific forms, into the atomic levels of the things that we are. Basically, essentially creating down to the atom, down to the cell of these oscillating cells and molecules that are creating matter. And what we have in our physical bodies as DNA is essentially the ultimate self-organized fragmentation of this source, because our DNA actually contains massive amounts of information. I'm going to go in that in just a second. This is how I see the evolution of consciousness when it became form. It began manifesting into these archon type beings. And I'm putting specifically and on purpose these faces of humans because I want you to kind of peel away from the idea of the imagery of what these things look like, even though historically we do have some wonderful depictions of what they are. I still would like you to look more beyond that in terms of vibrational frequency. So just imagine that these are like humans and they all vibrate at a different frequency. We have the archons, and then they descend from the archons where the Anunnakis, descended from the Anunnakis came the Draconians, descended from the Draconians came the Reptilians, and none of these things, you'll notice, say whether they are positive or negative. These are just manifestations of the fragmentation of infinite consciousness into form. However, the lower the vibrational frequency of these beings ends up creating a distortion of energy source. And that essentially causes a parasitic exchange, because especially in this three-dimensional plane, we're here to experience duality. And in that dualistic it's all about the exchange. And some of these organisms are parasitic in that they feed off emotions, they feed off these lower vibrational frequencies, and other organisms which are unconscious then become frail and paralyzed. In addition to that, that toroidal spin, which all things are moving in, begins to either slow down or invert itself. And because of the function and the form of each organism in this multiverse, we have two toroidal fields, above, below, the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. Just like our planet Earth, where when we go to South America, we notice that flush the toilet and it spins in another direction. That's because of how the magnetic pool of these toroidal fields are moving. Okay, and our body is very much like that as well. The lower half of our body is spinning at different rages, different states. But when we become paralyzed, depressed, or angry, or in these lower emotions, we begin to slow down and we become blocked in that. So this becomes a distortion of energy source. And just to give you a depiction of these archonic concepts, because again, we find these archonic concepts in all things. The benefits, these beings, these parasitics, not just archonics, but any parasitic consciousness, benefits from suffering, from illness, from separation, emotions, and also, in a sense, manipulating hologram in order to create a limitation of organic activation. Okay, what is organic activation? Basically means faster spin in the organism. Also maintains an artificial intelligence. So what happens when the organic speed of a vortex isn't moving so fast? It becomes artificial. It has to depend on something external in order for it to survive. And so this is where we start having these kinds of agendas that are transhumanists, that are wanting to merge us more with technology and take us away from the organic. This is precisely what we're experiencing right now as we go through this massive evolutionary move into these higher speeding center points of this trajectory in which we are on. It's a natural result of what happens. And we experience this kind of cycling for centuries and centuries. If you look at history since the origin of time, we've gone through several resets through history. And it's almost as if as soon as it gets to that highest point in that spin, that DNA spin in that coil, we again reset. And I believe that it's the friction. One thing, it's natural, but it's also the friction. The technology gets to the highest point, and then it has to go back into its most organic in order to create again. So this is very important to understand, because then we understand how we are cycling and what we're headed, the direction that we're headed in. As we are moving out of this 13th dimensional plane, we're moving into the next spin, which is a higher dimensional capacity for each organism in this multiverse. Now, from there, we have the grays, and I just put Lyrans, different species, humanoids, just as an example. This isn't the specific order of these evolutionary, manifestations, but from there, we have all of these other ranges of species that are available to us. And what they are representing in their genetic structure is the capacity to vibrate at different vibrational frequencies until we reach the highest levels, for example, angelic beings, light beings, pure intention, and then you go into the realm of light, frequency, and sound. So this is how, if we look at that Big Bang, for example, as we're looking from the lowest density into the highest density, we are literally interacting in all of these dimensional planes. Here's, again, just a very broad example. If we tend to allocate how these infinite consciousness begins to self-organize into 13 archetypal aspects. And again, the number 13, we have 13 chakras that are the vortices that make up the construct of the human organism and experience. We have 13 main archetypal aspects of ourselves in which we tend to allocate data and express ourselves through that data. So these species are essentially genetically modified over time. They are a combination of all of these frequencies that make up the different species that we are interacting with today, from the lowest to the highest. All of this is within ourselves. Referencing again, one of my favorite new writers that I've just discovered, Manfred Kleins, who has studied how form has a specific expression. It has a certain shape. And so this is really beautiful and complex study, because his focus was music, of course, and art, because he noticed that certain paintings would emote certain feelings in people. And so what it's telling us, and we see this in the beautiful design of the multiverse and even in our DNA, that the shapes that are that make up matter are expressing something. We also see that in Dr. Emoto's work in regards to the crystallized water and how form certain geometric shapes. We are that essentially water. I mean, the majority of our body is water, but more than that, it's that plasma that is projecting into that space, holding certain vibrational frequencies in our physical body. So all of these forms then make up the humans, but even beyond that, when you start going to the higher dimensional planes, the genetic construct of other species also has very unique shapes, very unique shapes. And our physical body, when source attaches into the physical body, we are attaching to a database in the physical, in this three-dimensional plane. And the database is non-physical until it embodies the body, and then it's that DNA. It essentially becomes the molecules that put together the physical body. And each one of these systems basically connect us to the data bank of everything that we are simultaneously. Okay. Again, we talk about movement occurred before life because our DNA is oscillating to create these shapes. And whatever the human is in resonance to, whatever the vibrational belief systems that are being expressed into the organism, make it a match to what it's going to experience next. In fact, in our DNA, only 2% of DNA is actually writing the code that makes up this physical hologram. Okay, only 2%, which means that the rest of this data is functioning in such an intelligent manner that actually within all of that is encoded all of the other simultaneous aspects of ourselves that are being experienced through the human form. We call it junk DNA and dark DNA because we cannot see with the ranges of our visibility and frequency how these are linked to the other functions that are occurring in the multidimensional etheric body. If we look at how we have passed through history since the origin of time, you and I are related. Just 2,000 years ago, you and I have a cousin in common. So we have a very specific origin. This graph is simply depicting how these bloodlines have passed through history. And when you overlap this into the genetic modification of bloodlines from the origin of time into what we call today our modern day society, it is incredible how specific bloodlines have been preserved. What happens when you preserve specific bloodlines? It strengthens the traits within that bloodline. The physical form cannot sustain these higher vibrational and heavier, let's say, identified genetic traits. And so oftentimes, because, of ancestral reproduction, the people that have come out of this union, they oftentimes have problems. They have problems in the physical body. The physical body becomes distorted. They have some illnesses. The physical body cannot hold that construct of genetic data, but in fact it is reinforcing specific bloodlines. Those specific bloodlines are data. The more that you incest in within a family, you are strengthening traits of bloodlines. And that's what's been done for centuries in many royal families, royal bloodlines, from which every single one of us are descendants. This is why some of us have expressions of, Cleopatra, Anthony, Queen Elizabeth. We have all of these different traits. And essentially, these are archetypal frequencies that are embedded in our genetic code and make up what we are. Now, the platonic shapes themselves have certain expressions, the volume, the expression that they make. In this two-dimensional plane, we are operating by the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, this is very important because we are very much, everything in this world is designed by this beautiful golden ratio from nature to the body to everything, to even structures of cities are somehow naturally created in this. When you go up to the higher dimensional planes, they have different constructs. These constructs are depicting how light is bent, how light creates form. And we are moving in and out of these different dimensional planes. But what we know as our body, as the 13 dimensional planes that make up our body, each one of these stripes, each one of these lines that are connected to the chakra system are vibrating at a specific frequency. Those specific frequencies have the capacity of holding these platonic shapes. In fact, if you zoom in to one of these different dimensional planes and you look at the form of matter at the molecular level on those planes, you will see that they make up, and the construct of those cells are essentially mimicking these platonic shapes. Just the way on Earth we have a combination of them, and we are moving in and out of these dimensional planes. We literally, what it creates is a braiding effect of vibrational frequency as it moves through the dimensional planes. And our physical bodies end up looking like this. We are at the center core, and we are interconnected to our quote unquote fragments, organized archetypal aspects of ourselves, our ET aspects of ourselves, which are just higher dimensional aspects of ourselves that we are meeting and interacting with based on the resonance of the original aware aspect of ourselves. So the core, the observer that is at the center of this bubble is the one that is observing all of these aspects. The more aware that it becomes, the more conscious and the more it changes its resonance in order to access all of this data that it expresses. And our ancestral lineages are holding on to within the physical body. Every cell of the body contains this data bank of connections through our entire, I don't like to use the word history because it's like we want to reference time, but again, time, it's simultaneous. We are experiencing alternate aspects of ourselves, which we call past lives. And so we have access to this data. It is the same in the other direction when we are accessing ET consciousness. We have bloodlines because we are descendants of these ET races in our bloodline. And so at the time when we become conscious, changing our vibrational frequency, we begin to have more contact. We begin to remember experiences throughout our life. And even more so, we begin to realize that our entire family, more often than not, with so many people that I work with in my support groups, discover that contact is actually coming down the family lineage. So it's within each of these dimensional expressions that we find this beauty of the platonic solids that create geometrical shapes, that create these beings that we are interacting with. Their genetic data is embedded in ours. And this also plays another role in regards to the hybridization program, because the hybridization program is the merging of many different bloodlines. And in order to merge those bloodlines, sometimes it has to be done in vitro, sometimes they do it on a petri dish. I'll go into that in just a minute. But currently, we only have this visible spectrum. Okay, so in this 13th dimensional spiral that we're on, if you see the increased frequency that we are moving through here, this is all that we can see. When we begin to tune into our higher senses, we can potentially tune in to these higher frequencies. This is how we have contact. We can see, we can these beings on that level. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. It doesn't mean that they're not there, but we are literally projecting these beings into form and shape. It is the same with UFOs. Now, the way that these UFOs are structured, and I have been on several different kinds of craft at this point, everything from lenticular craft to honeycomb shape to round Death Star looking craft, triangular craft. What is most impressive about these crafts is that they are also moving in this toroidal. In fact, in the center of the craft, they have a shaft that the energy is moving through. And depending on the kind of craft that it is, the frequency that moves this energy changes. In a draconian, so also I want to mention that it's a very organic and highly advanced technology that is telepathic and that merges essentially with DNA. In fact, on craft, when I went for the first time consciously in the physical, touching the walls of the craft would respond to my touch, and they would shift. They would use holograms a lot in this space. But everything is done by the mind. In several hybridization crafts that I have been on, they are honeycomb type crafts that are literally navigated and remote moved by a
Oh, Geraldine. Geraldine, we're just going to take off. Neil, are you there?
Oh, we're here. We're here.
Okay.
He'll be back momentarily.
Okay, I think she just was about to take off into the UFO realm.
Well, she has to have all the pieces with her, so we're all ready. Bated breath, get your seatbelts on, everyone.
I have to say, I'm really enjoying this. Usually I just tune out and listen to people in the background, but I'm really listening to everything she's saying. I think
the slides, the slides are really making an impact also. And very personal.
Yes. No, I think it's one of the best presentations I've heard her say. I mean, we just saw her in Sedona last week, but there she is. She's back.
Right. Okay, we are ready.
Okay, hold on. Let me open this. Okay. All right, let's try that again. Hold on. Let me open this. Okay. So on these draconian crafts that I was on, it's just very heavy. And if you could think of everything that is the darkest thing you have ever considered or thought of, this is what moves the vibrational frequency. This entire thing has this empty, shallow shaft in the middle of this spherical looking craft, and it moves like a toroidal field. The entire thing moves like, and I remember when I went to the center of the craft, you can feel the pool of this energy through you. The entire thing is vibrating so heavy, and the different layers of this craft literally are organized by frequency as well, from lowest to highest. So I found that to be very interesting. But again, it's just talking about how this vibrational frequency is sustaining in order for it to navigate, to move. So essentially, our human bodies are made up of all of these systems, interdimensional systems. And when we experience contact, when we want to experience contact, first of all, we really want to deprogram from the limiting beliefs, because again, thought forms are frequency, and you are made up of your thought forms. If your thought forms are low, then your frequency will shift into the lowest range. You will not be able to be a match to anything beyond the three-dimensional plane. When you shift that vibrational frequency, you begin to enter into higher realms. And the majority of our contact within the Akashic planes, the astral traveling, is usually occurring within this 7th to 9th dimensional plane. And when we start going into the 10th and 11th dimensional plane, you start going into these angelic type beings. These everything between the 10th and 12th dimensional plane are these interdimensional beings. And the form and the shape that they take really depends on the archetypal aspects that we have allocated to these beings. But what they really look like in those dimensional planes is something completely different. Okay. And so we need to start going beyond the way our limited thinking is when we think about ET contact. Because the faster that we spin, the more we can interact. And this is how my contact story has occurred. When I learned how to meditate and spin through the programming, coming into that 0 point, into that harmonic balance, this is where I began to have incredible amounts of contact. And remember that because everything moves in this spiral DNA form, the universe, ourselves, the body, energy, everything, we we are moving through cycles. And so even when you get up to the highest levels, you're going to continue to experience a fractal manifestation of the same patterns of data and information. So you learn the lessons in different ways infinitely until you reach the highest level, essentially. Our physical bodies that make up this hologram can shift, and we become more fluid, we become more energetic. Our contact, when we start getting to that level also, we begin to access data that we haven't been aware of before. We begin to broaden our awareness from the immediate physical body into the etheric aspects of our bodies, which is the non-physical. And what's in that holographic data, our DNA essentially, is the ancestral contact, ancestral programs that are passed down through history. In fact, the beauty of our bodies is that through our mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited through the maternal line, is that it's an aggregate copy of the before. So this is how we can do, genealogical history printouts and understand where we come from. But if we keep going beyond that, and if we broaden the spectrum of what we're reading within the genetic code, we begin to notice that there's interdimensional aspects of ourselves that also run through our bloodline, because it is what makes up our DNA. The way hybridization functions in bloodlines, we are taking that genetic information and we are creating more organisms. It's basically a splicing of the soul is what is occurring here. It is the splicing of the soul. And the splicing of the soul then creates all of these organisms, new organisms that continue to sustain these cyclical patterns in the matrix multiverse that we are experiencing in. Through my experience, I've had a lot of contact throughout my entire life, producing up to 24 hybrid children in 4 different agendas, one being a humanoid military agenda, which is also very interested in this information. And we have to understand that everything in our world kind of understands these things, and our construct of societies are built around this understanding. And we are the ones that have to educate ourselves and catch up on that information so that we can understand how to navigate our realm. But our genetic data is absolutely the most valuable currency, essentially, in this multiverse, because it's a portal. They are portals. We are portals to these infinite possibilities and races and species of data that we consist of. So the hybrids that are being created and implemented back into the timeline are genetically modified, which means that within the crystalline structure of your, what is crystalline structure? It's the geometric pattern that is created by your DNA, is basically genetically modified or activated dormant aspects of it in order to create different geometric shapes. This is what hybrids come out to be. They are a vibrational frequency and then reinserted back into the bloodline. So I'd like to end this presentation with just a kind of overview that what we are in this multidimensional experience, what we are essentially experiencing is a reflection of ourselves. We are meeting ourselves, potentially our future selves, in fact, that have been genetically modified in a sense. All that it means is that our DNA, the geometric form of our DNA, has been activated through the different higher dimensional planes in which we exist on. And because everything is occurring simultaneously, we then become these projectors of this interaction. So I will end right here and maybe even open up for some questions, but I'm Geraldine Orozco, and you can work with me through hypnotherapy on my website at geraldineorozco.com, and also my support group at hybridmother.com, where we go deep into some of these topics as well in order to understand who we are and what we're doing here. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
really brought it all together.
Thank you so much.
I have a question, Geraldine, though, just about the interbreeding on the human side, interbreeding families and cultural groups. You're saying it strengthens the DNA. Other people say it weakens the DNA.
Right, which is really interesting. But what's actually happening is that because we're in a three-dimensional plane, the physical form cannot hold these strengthened DNA traits. So what happened is that the physical form breaks down. And so we end up having bodies that have diseases. But if you look at their DNA, it's actually quite strengthened in the etheric aspect, because that's what's actually being strengthened. It's the information. What you'll see is that generations coming down from those bloodlines, their traits are very prominent. And this is what designed human race. This is where we have different blood types in different parts of the world. We have very specific traits culturally, for, let's say, Latin America, China, all these different races that we have in our world are the strengthened traits that have gone down through history. And they are also linked with these interdimensional bloodlines like Pleiadian. Some bloodlines have more Pleiadian bloodlines, some of them have more or humanoid, reptilian, so on and so forth. And most races will dominate that vibrational frequency and the traits that manage that bloodline. That's the interesting thing about it. And so are the hybridization programs that take place within these parts of the world.
So does go ahead, Alan.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
So does a soul experiencing itself in a human body, that's a soul that maybe has an Arcturian theme to it or whatever, is that connected to the bloodline, or could it be a different bloodline lineage connected to a certain being, but then a soul from a completely different species incarnates into that body?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have to remember that we're one. And I think that's the thing that we always forget when we talk about these topics, but we are essentially one. And so, for example, if you have an Arcturian expression, you begin to remember yourself as an Arcturian. You are that. You have that genetic trait in your DNA structure. The platonic form and the geometric shape that is existing in this Arcturian aspect of yourself is expressed through the body. And the more that you deprogram, you can access that data. You can also access the traits of these beings. They are organized in archetypes in our 13-dimensional plane, 13 different archetypes, which basically represents the spectrum of frequency from lowest to highest. And so when we're reaching the higher forms, we're accessing those abilities. Our physical body, when we start accessing the higher levels, we have intuition, we have telepathy, we have all these amazing traits that are operating on these dimensional planes, and we can access all of them by deprogramming our DNA. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And so you said, so I saw that you had the graph of the 13 planes, right? And because that's so, from what I've come across in the past, it seems that there might be like 12 dimensions and the 13th one being the void. Is there any truth to that? And when you say the 13 archetypes, are they all archetypes based on each plane?
Exactly, yes. Basically, whatever the platonic form, how light bends within that space creates a vibrational frequency. Vibrational frequency is translated into color, sound, shape, and basically when you break those down, they make up how DNA is written, just the way the code of DNA is written. It's like a syntax essentially, and that will depict the form that is being manifested. 13, I don't know about the void aspect of it. I just know that we are in a gigantic spiral, and really what we're moving through is into the next spiral, which is the 2021, I believe, that we're going into.
Right. In the Fibonacci cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah,
in the Fibonacci cycle. Sorry, I can't remember. Yeah. So 21. Yeah. So what does that mean? It means that organisms now are going to have access to the 21 chakra system. Some people already have that because they're already raising their vibrational frequency to that level. Some people have even more. But the organisms shift in alignment. And so what we need to be careful with now is to move more towards the organic and away from technology, which limits and hinders the expression of this aspect of ourselves.
Well, let me just go back to the royal family, the interbreedings of royal families. Are you saying it strengthens an etheric connection but weakens a physical connection? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's
Oh,
correct.
really? But
Yes.
isn't that dangerous if the physical DNA starts to break down? They might have built yet an etheric um, gift, but they're breaking down on the physical level. So talk about that just a little bit, because I
So
wanted to.
there's two parts to that. And okay, so one of them is, so the organisms that are being created, remember, this is just one fractal of many fractals that we are. Each organism, all of us here have infinite fractals. And so what happens is that within that genetic structure, it strengthens in other dimensional planes, but our physical form becomes weak. However, when this organism begins to reproduce, the traits that are passed down are pulling from the data bank. So, for example, reptilian bloodlines are really, really heavy, and they reinforce the primal aspects of mankind. So, when these were heavily preserved within royal bloodlines, this is what was brought down, and it creates a pool of data bank in that primal conceptualization of consciousness. And so that basically is brought into these bloodlines. And we are a product, we are descendants of that. So in each of us now at this point, because there's 4 billion people on this, trillion people on this planet, we have like a little teaspoon of that within us. And the more we continue in the hybridization program, certain traits are removed because they don't match the vibrational rate that we're moving at right now anymore. So that's what's actually happening right now. A lot of these reptilian bloodlines from the simultaneous bloodlines that have been strengthened previously are now going out, and we're going more into the higher DNA expressions. So we're going more into intuition. We're basically going into the light bodies is what we are going to end up in a couple centuries. But all of that is expressed through the geometry of DNA.
So I want to go deeper into that whole reptilian concept for a moment. That a lot of people just think all reptilians are negative beings, and then I hear a lot of people say that most races have a polarity to it. And I've even heard that there's reptilian beings and there's serpentine beings that are basically the polarization of the two. And I've also heard that the reptilian bloodlines were here before the humans came to the galaxy, right? Can you just talk on that a little bit? Are they good and bad reptilians? Is it only the negative ones that affect our free will and the positive ones let us have our experience? What's your take on that?
Okay, really complex questions. I want to begin with free will, because essentially, if you look at this structure, if you see how we have evolved from source into what we are, there is a beautiful intelligence and a structure to things. So you are just an organism that plays a role in this symphony of creation. So if you look at it from that way, your free will is limited to what you're experiencing within that dimensional plane. Keep that in mind. Even the organism that becomes conscious and aware, it still has to play within the realm that it's living and existing in until it chooses to exist in another dimensional plane. Okay, so in this three-dimensional plane, we are in a matrix multiverse. It's a holographic multiverse that experiences 3D, which is based on the number 3, but we're experiencing duality and creation. And the dualistic is always that expansion and contraction. All organisms follow and mimic that form. That means that we are going to experience both dualistic aspects. That means that we are experiencing parasitic and also creative energies and expressions in this multiverse. So all races have these dualistic aspects to them. That's why I want to depart from saying the names of them, because in my groups, I hear and see all kinds of different species that we don't even think of. We see them all the time. So I think what I'm noticing is that it's an expression from their specific lineage, and some people have been genetically modified organically. Keep in mind, this is organic, right? Self-organized data into their systems where they have access to these beings that we don't even know of in this timeline. So I do believe that the descendants of the archons, that was the first primal expression of consciousness, in its most separate form, created then, let's say, these Anunnaki beings, these draconian beings. I do believe that there is a progression to that. And I think we see that in our history. We see the evolution of that. We see that in a lot of ancient texts, but we can also see it in our physical body. When we are in a fetal form, we literally look like reptiles in the fetus when we are developing. Just looking at the gestation process of human, you can see the gestation process of the universe. This is the evolution of our genetics through history. We come from that reptilian form into this form. And so none of that is really a metaphor or a theory. I think that that's quite depicted in our physiological aspect. I mean, we have the reptilian brain, which manages the primal part of us, and we're beginning to learn how to dominate that and becoming these incredibly advanced beings that are now operating in the etheric realms more telepathically, interdimensionally. So,
great. So, do you have a question, John? Because I have another question here. No. So what can we do with this information? This is a evolution that's happening, and it's through the cycles of time and vibrational frequency increase. But what can we do maybe to help accelerate that or access that higher DNA frequency so we can upgrade the human vehicle?
Yeah, exactly. Upgrading the human vehicle is exactly what we want to do. And essentially, now that we know that we basically operate like these donuts, these toroidal fields, we want to spin our body as fast as possible. We spin faster when we have less trauma, when we have less suffering, because all of those we have to remember, like, because we live in a hologram, we are experiencing an illusion. This is no joke, literally, it's an illusion in that we are traveling more in empty space rather than matter and form. And so if we really begin to program that into our brain, we can understand and kind of disconnect from the illusion of the physical plane and begin to activate the parts of the body that are creative. We come into the creator self by spinning our body as fast as possible. We manage the first three chakras, activating heart, throat, third eye, and begin to train in our lucid dreaming. This requires awareness throughout your entire day of your body, 360 degrees. It requires the cultivation of your attention and your intention as a holographic projector of things. Because if your attention is subconsciously in something negative or not in the present moment, you're not doing anything. You're not affecting anything but counter-creating. So our awareness in the present moment is actually mathematically, physically, psychologically created for creation. And so we need to come into that present moment in order to begin to activate our DNA and the information that's available to us. Mm-hmm.
You know what might be interesting, Neil, if we want to get Dan Winter in here for a little minute and interface with Geraldine, because he's very much along the same frequencies and the bloodlines and the lucidity and then Dan brings it actually into technology. So I wonder if Dan has been listening, because Dan, are you with us?
Yes. Just put my camera on 1 second. Yes.
Okay, that technology stuff, it's like, I know it's 20th century. So what did you think of what Geraldine was saying about it's very similar to what you're talking about, right?
You know, Geraldine is a wonderful healer too, and she's intuitive and a hypnotist, and and has more personal experience than me for sure. On the physics side, we have tried to be even more specific. What going to the next dimension means by frequency signature, etc. And but the basic outline there is very useful. And where she mentions even a lucid dreaming as a focus of attention, that's what we've been teaching lately too. So we're together on this.
What about the bloodline stuff? Because you talk about and the fractal nature of bloodline evolution and the interbreeding and the green bloodlines as opposed to the red and the blue. I know you talk about that a little bit, right?
Yes. No, that's what we want to do because I want to tell that story in my lecture, actually. And that's exactly right. That basically we think that Enki, who would be part of the Anunnaki, had green blood, really, and called us Takadama, which means red, because he was shocked to see the way we had an iron-based blood, which happened when our ancestors were forced underground due to their wars. And that's part of the big story. And that's why chlorophyll and hemoglobin are the same molecule, basically.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I saw. So I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear your presentation, Dan, because yeah.
And Geraldine was with us yesterday. We had our advanced SSP group, and boy, do we have fun. So
Yeah.
Right. Well, one more thing about the connection to your work and Geraldine is that the frequency of spin. Can you relate that to what Geraldine was saying, Dan?
Really, I think her concept that increased spin density is the issue is absolutely correct. That's the correct metaphor. And if you were talking to some physicists about that, you might need a few more details. And indeed, if you do a power spectrum of the heart, for example, harmonic inclusiveness, and the brain, harmonic inclusiveness perfected by Golden ratio, that's the beginning of superposed axes of spin, the definition of the next dimension, which is specifically increased spin density and actually increased density, which is what those longitudinal nodes of sacred space are. That's why they say you go to the next density. What they mean is that's when you get leverage on bigger tornadoes.
But bigger consciousness field brain capacities as well, right?
Well, it isn't limited to the brain. In fact,
right. I didn't mean brain, but consciousness field. Yeah. Right.
It's the size of the field of propagation over which you can be centripetal. In this case, a longitudinal array. That's the point, that we could define that electrically, actually. That's what we hope to go into. Yes.
Well, I just want you to slow down a little bit as you lecture, because you lose me after a sentence when you. So if you could explain some of the terms, but I think you and Geraldine, we should do a whole dialogue of that, Neil, like a whole day of something like that.
Geraldine's wonderful. Geraldine has this amazing aura, and Geraldine has the ability to keep guys from fighting. It's all good.
That's great. Well, I cannot even begin to explain it like Dan explains it, but Dan is the only person I have found that could explain it in the physics aspect. So I understand everything, but I cannot explain the way you do. So I'm really happy to see your presentation, Dan. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being the psychologist and the hypnotist and the healer.
Thank you.
Geraldine, where can people find you, by the way?
Yes, my website is geraldineorozco.com if you want to get hypnotherapy or DNA reprogramming. And if you want to join the support group, you can visit me at hybridmother.com. It's just happy to be of service, and thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Geraldine.
See you later, Geraldine.
Much love.